Welcome back to the channel, folks. We're just glad to have you here with us today. We're going to be talking about something that has been talked about for darn near a decade, microstamping and your firearms here in California on The Breakdown.
All right, Rick. So, let's get into this. We've got Assembly Bill, 1688, introduced by Assemblyman Fong out of Kern County. I guess something that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see as far as legislation coming out of California, but definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think there's a pivot. I think Vince Fong is one of the best assemblymen we have here in the state of California, because he's not waiting for the tide to turn to start turning the tide himself. And we need to elect more people like Vince Fong. You know, I just want to do a shout out on behalf of the entire CRPA and Second Amendment community, because we really need to get behind these assemblymen and senators that are willing to go the extra mile against an incredible tide. And microstamping is a great place to start, because it's absolutely the most inane concept that they could have ever came up on firearms, Kevin.
Well, right. It's one of those where, you know, they come and they make a law even though they have no factual based evidence to support it. It's a law for a substantial amount of time. They still have no evidence to support the law. And I mean, this is something that comes in the name of safety, but really it just ends up being a situation where we can't get firearms in California because manufacturers don't want to inherit the cost of California legislation.
Well, and I think it's more importantly to see how inane this law really has been is to go back in history. And we don't have to go back that far, but if you look at Hollywood has always loved, you know, crime-based, whether it's Westerns, gangster movies, things like that. Many of those classics made well before either one of us were like on the planet walking, but tell the history and the true story for once out of Hollywood that many criminals, not law-abiding citizens, were in the habit of altering their firearms, you know, taking files, acids, different things to get rid of serial numbers. And in 1968, you know, to try to stem all the violence, we'd had a couple people assassinated, Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King during that year, of like, you know what, we're going to put serial numbers on every firearm because that's going to stop crime with firearms. This is what we're going to do.
Yeah, and
how'd that turn out?
Well, it's a pretty common thing. I mean, and you do see it in a lot of movies. You know, what do you do to try and make yourself untrackable or untraceable? You're gonna mess with the serial number. That's why when you go to a pawn shop, they're not going to accept anything that has a serial number damaged.
Right.
That's just the way it is. But the thing is that the law-abiding citizens aren't doing that. It's just another law that's enhancing criminal experience over the law-abiding citizens' experience of owning firearms. It doesn't actually apply to anybody because anybody who's going to commit a crime, they're going to take that away.
Point you removed the serial number, you became a criminal. And so no one's going to do that unless they intend to do criminal activity, which is my point. And now there's two issues I want to bring up because I talked about this years ago when it first came up, and I want to refresh everyone's memories. Number one, it is hard to remove a serial number on the side of, you know, a receiver or a firearm, you know, including the older ones that were made in the 60s, 70s, 80s, etc. But it's very easy to remove it off of a firing pin, which is one of their brilliant ideas of like, you're going to put this little tiny microstamping on the firing pin so when it hits the casing and hits the primer especially, it leaves that little indentation, goes down the ground. And I told people when they first introduced this, Kevin, like, criminals are smart. So a criminal goes to a range, they're in the bay next to you, you're in your range, you're shooting your firearm. It's a 9mm, a 38, a 45 standard. Those all can be shot out of two different types of firearms, a semi-auto, which under this law would have a microstamp, and a revolver, which doesn't. Well, then all I got to do is pick up your casings, and when I go to my crime scene, I do whatever heinous thing with the gun I'm going to do. I leave your casings. Now, guess who was at the crime scene? Oh, you were, Kevin. Not me.
Right.
Not the criminal.
Yeah,
like, it's just too easy to get around. And the second thing is, you borrow your girlfriend, who probably as a criminal went in and falsely bought the firearm in the first place. And then you say, hey, thanks for picking it up, babe. Can you hand me your nail file? And 10 minutes later, there is no microstamp. So again, This is just a penalty on law-abiding citizens. It does nothing to move the ball in a positive direction in a state that already wants to release every criminal back on the streets.
And I think that's what we kind of need to come back to here is we need to be able to hold our elected officials accountable. You know, we're seeing laws this year coming out, or not necessarily even laws, but local ordinances like the one in San Jose. Who's going to hold them accountable to the data that gets sent to that nonprofit as far as charging people for insurance and actually using that insurance? Where is that money going? This is a law that was made, almost 10 years ago now that has no accountability to it. Do you have data from other states and firearms that are not on the California roster proving that those firearms were not safe? No, you don't.
Right.
Or else they would be trying to enhance this law even more. And this is where we need to resume the power of not continuing to elect these people because they are not substantiating their arguments. They're creating laws that are attacking our fundamental rights, and they're not actually doing anything to help society.
Well, and here's the thing, like with any product, and I want people to think about this because I think this analogy works. We have some car companies that are amazing in this country because every year they test their cars and they go, hey, Toyota didn't stop with the Tercel 20 years ago and go, perfect, never going to upgrade it. No, as technologies have improved, Tercels went, as an example, from being a car that didn't collapse on impact to one it does in order to save the occupant. So they made those improvements. If you apply California's draconian gun laws to car manufacturers, everybody would be driving a 1990 Tercel because it would have never been allowed to have been upgraded in this state. Firearms companies have actually improved the safety of the firearm. They've made it harder to use it without knowing what you're doing. They've enhanced so many features for safety, yet the average Californian, one, can't buy it because it has to be another state because they've made that happen. And two, it's caused the ones that are here to go up in a price that, the single mom living in an area that's not great, the dad who doesn't have a lot of expendable income because, his kids might have medical issues. I mean, the list goes on. They're being priced out of being able to defend themselves at a point where this state has defunded law enforcement. People are not going to police academies like they used to because who would want to have a job where you're hated instantly? And now as a result, criminals being let out, we're seeing the time for someone to come 30, 40 minutes. Hi, if somebody's trying to kill me with a gun, I want to put that in really clear perspective. That's like you and I going, sure, law enforcement, could you come save me from a prize MMA fighter? Because those are 45-minute rounds. 45-minute bouts if it goes to full 15. I got maybe seconds in that ring.
Yeah, and I think that what you said was appropriate. It's pricing people out of being able to defend themselves. Let's not forget firearms are the great equalizer. That is how we preach, is one way to be able to defend yourself, especially in something like a situation where where you have a home invasion and police are minutes away when you've got seconds. Mm-hmm. So, you get a bill like this, and that's why it's important to give kudos to an assemblyman like Assemblyman Fong here, right, trying to bring logic and reason back to this state in understanding that we have created a law that does nothing but hurt. It doesn't help anybody. It has priced people out of being able to defend themselves. And it's priced people out of, having that technology. And without that technology, all you're doing is giving more people more of an incentive to commit these crimes.
And I think one of the things Assemblyman Fong is doing and doing effectively, and again, we need to do a shout out, is, look, each of us needs to realize something. I'm fortunate enough to have a home, but if I ran my home the way the state runs laws, my wife would come to me and say, hey, the garbage disposal blew up. And I'd say, great, the gardener's going to mow the front lawn. And she would look at me and go, wait, what? Because obviously the problem is the garbage disposal doesn't work. So I'm going to attack that by mowing the front lawn? No, I have to get a plumber in. And the analogy goes this way. There is no thing that came up that is solved by microstamping. This is just another way for them to disguise what they're really doing, which is slowly, death by 1,000 cuts, making guns illegal in California across the board. This is a gun grab.
Yeah, and it is setting themselves up for further arguments, and that is the logical conclusion. You ban you effectively ban specific firearms in California, and then you later come and make the claim that Californians aren't interested in these kinds of guns. Well, no, that's not telling the whole story. You actually forbade us from having these, or you told us that we were going to pay penalties, whether it be fines or be put in prison. So you can't use these sort of arguments against me when you have already stacked the deck in order to make those arguments against me. So, the logical conclusion definitely points, when you, like we said, when you have no evidence for the law in the first place, and then you continue to make arguments that Californians don't want these things, it does lead to the conclusion that, this is a cultural thing, and they are trying to rid firearms existence from California.
Folks, we need you to do a shout out. Send an email to Vince Fong's office. He's in the Assembly District in Kern County, California, thanking him for standing up for your rights. And as always, click the links below. Add us on, ring the bell so you know when we're going to be back on. And we're going to be back as much as we can. We've had some staff here at CRPA that have been down with COVID, but good news is they're coming back out of it. And so these are going to be on a more regular basis. Thanks for supporting us.